Thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Yusuf Siraj. Good afternoon. I'm privileged and grateful to be speaking with you from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, also known as the beautiful city of Vancouver, BC. I'd like to thank our co-organizers for being here, Chris Reeson, the Chief Operating Officer of ISS of BC, as well as Bahar Tahiri, Project Consultant of ISS BC, BC Refugee Hub, and Tarek Tayeb from Islam Unraveled Anti-Racism Initiative, Foundation for Path Forward, and BC Muslim Association. Tarek is also a co-founder of the Muslim Food Bank. So June 20th, 2021 marks the 20th anniversary of World Refugee Day. This year's theme is Together We Heal, Learn, and Shine. In our role as the official faith-based community convener for British Columbia, we have convened this event in partnership with ISS of BC, BC Refugee Hub to highlight refugee successes and contributions to Canada, as well as the role faith communities, NGOs, and the government have in supporting refugees. According to the United Nations, the world is witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record. An unprecedented 83 million people around the world have been forced from their home by conflict, climate change, and persecution by the end of 2020. A disproportionate amount of these people are children, and many of these 83 million human beings become stateless people who have been denied a nationality and access to basic rights such as education, healthcare, employment, and freedom of movement. In Canada, we welcome nearly half of all refugees settled around the world in 2020. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees recently called Canada a bright light in a horrible year for refugee resettlement. Before moving to our first speaker today, I would like to invite and give my co-host, Bahar, the opportunity to say a few words.
Thanks, Yusuf. The BC Refugee Hub is a program of ISS of BC. The BC Refugee Hub is generously funded by the province of British Columbia through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Thank you to the province of BC for your support and making today's event possible. Today on World Refugee Day, we acknowledge and admire the drive and determination of refugees and the contributions they make to Canadian communities. I would like to welcome our amazing group of speakers and our audience members for joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bahar. So today, our first speaker is Mary Point. Mary is a member of the Musqueam Indian Band, formerly working there as the Musqueam Community Planner and Facilities Manager. She is currently the Manager of Indigenous Relations at Vancouver International Airport, or YVR, and the Relationship Manager for the Musqueam Indian Band / YVR Airport Sustainability and Friendship Agreement. Mary is an accomplished Indigenous professional, and she weaves culture, protocol, and best practices together into strategic planning for those seeking to do business with First Nations or get to know them. She has worked throughout British Columbia for 2 decades, developing these strategic partnerships and friendships with a range of First Nation communities and local businesses. So Mary, please, thank you for joining us. We'd like to hear your voice.
Hichka Yusuf, Asiam Nasiaya, Antha Mary Point, Tanitana Kumathquiam. Amitsep Quatquilam. Honored visitors, in the language of my ancestors, I let you know that my name is Mary Point and I'm from Musqueam, and I welcomed you to my virtual space. And I'd like to ask each of you, as you join into this conference from all over the place, to think about the land that you're on and the people who lived there first. World Refugee is a great reminder to all of us that this is a time of movement. People are moving around the world to find a place of safety, to have a new beginning, or they've been displaced involuntarily as a result of war, industrialization, famine, natural disaster, climate change, as I'm sure you're all going to address. I mention all of these because welcoming newcomers to this part of the world is not new for Musqueam people. We have always been welcoming new visitors into our area for those that come with good intentions. We are the original stewards of the land, and we love nothing better than to help you feel at home and welcome. I know you were expecting my relative Rhiannon Bennett here today, and she's a great speaker, but I'll let you know that I'll just speak from the heart about my community and the things that are important that I work on as an elder, as a grandmother, and as a corporate organizer. For me, it's very important that all visitors to the area, as they begin their new lives in our territory, feel not only a sense of safety, but a sense of belonging. You belong here. Our great leader, Keapulano, used to tell us all, don't forget who you are, but don't forget who we are. We're coming together from many communities to form one community. And if we approach our lifestyles together in this way, we will thrive. Yusuf was asking me, what does success mean to me? And to me, that's what it means. Home, belonging, safety, togetherness, community for us all. I wear orange today, I should mention, for my father, for his 17 brothers and sisters, for our many elders, and for people younger than me who attended residential school. The last residential school in British Columbia closed in 1996. This is an awakening for many who are hearing about it for the first time. It's something that we have always known. There was a terrible, terrible find into Kamloops to Secwepemc territory. And there have been more finds since, and we expect there to be more news of these children being discovered. The sad part of it is that we would all love nothing better than to reconnect these children with their families and their communities. But unfortunately, I feel that this may not be possible. Many will get answers and be able to get some closure, but many may never get the answers they seek. And for this, we send up special prayers for the children and the families who live on in the wake of that terrible time. In the past week, the government provided royal assent for a new statutory holiday, a day of truth and reconciliation, September 30th, formerly known as Orange Shirt Day. This past week, I mentioned both of these together. This past week, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People passed through both levels of government and is expected to receive royal assent. For me, Indigenous peoples means and the people of the land from wherever you are who have been displaced for all of the reasons that we've discussed. So I think of you all and send prayers and love up for all refugees today, on this day, on August 9th, the World Indigenous Peoples Day, and on September 30th. And for all of those moving about and for the great work that you're about to embark on today, I'd like to send you off with my great uncle Dominic's paddle song. His traditional name was Tiaksip. This is a song that Musqueam people sing when we're entering into a new community in our canoes to let you know that we're coming with good intentions. It's also something we sing when we want to send people off on a journey. I sing it today for those children who are yet to reach their final resting place in their natural homelands. And I sing it today for all of the refugees that are here now and that have yet to come. It's also a song, I should add, that my Uncle Dominic brought canoe carving and canoe racing back to our community. And when he did, as it was told to me, Musqueam hadn't been in the races for a while. And the other communities were like, hey, Musqueam, you haven't been on the water, you won't do very well. And our warriors got in that canoe and gave it their all, whether they cramped up or lost a paddle, and they won. So I sing this song also because it's a victory song. And I believe success will be victory People will feel a sense of belonging. Communities will come together in a meaningful way. And the work that you're doing today has value. My hands are raised to each and every one of you. Yo!
Thank you so much, Mary. What a beautiful way to start the event. We appreciate your words and your voice. And again, the importance for us to understand and address the local realities of our brothers, sisters, and friends in the First Nations community is of extreme importance for us. So thank you again for your time and your voice today. We are now going to start our first topic panel, and I'm going to introduce my co-host, Chris Friesen. He's the Chief Operating Officer of ISS of BC, and as settlement services at ISS of BC for over 25 years. Chris has been at the forefront of major immigration and refugee resettlement initiatives in BC and Canada in recent history, including the unprecedented resettlement operation involving Syrian refugees in the 2015 to 2016 period. Chris currently serves as the chair and founding member of the Canadian Immigrant Settlement Sector Alliance and is co-chair with IRCC of the National Settlement Council. Many of my friends owe him a debt of gratitude because they came through the WUSC student program, which Chris helped launch in 1990s at UBC. So that's the World University Services of Canada. So thank you very much, Chris, for being here with us today, and I pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here today to mark World Refugee Day. As Joseph had mentioned at the beginning, some of the staggering numbers on the global context, it's hard to imagine that a country like Canada and the population of Canada times two is what we're facing today in this refugee crisis, both with refugees and internally displaced. Canada has been at the forefront of a number of innovative responses to the global refugee crisis over many years, and is in fact the largest per capita resettlement country in the world. And through that experience over many, many years, promising and innovative practices have emerged over time. I think, though, as we embark on this panel of global to local, I think it's important to keep in mind, where are we going on a global front? Year after year, the plight of refugees unfortunately grows. The number of resettlement places is absolutely insufficient to meet the demand. Is it time to start looking for a new durable solution? For those of you unfamiliar, the UNHCR is guided by 3 durable solutions: local integration, repatriation, and resettlement. But with increased protracted refugee situations, which you're going to hear about soon, is it time for a 4th durable solution? Perhaps human development and poverty reduction that begins to provide more educational opportunities for refugees that have been in protracted situations for decades. So it gives me great honor and privilege to moderate this panel for you today. We have 3 speakers, and we're going to cover the global to the local. What's happening globally at the moment, before turning our attention to some of the innovative and promising practices, particularly during COVID, that have been taking place to support resettled refugees. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first panelist. Dr. Jennifer Hyman is currently the Associate Vice President of Research for York University. She previously was the director of the Center for Refugee Studies, one of the only centers of its kind in Canada, looking at refugee migration issues. As a professor of social science and geography, her research traverses political, economic, urban, cultural, feminist dimensions of migration, focusing on people's mobility, displacement, and security. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's truly a pleasure to be here today. And I just want to make sure that you're seeing are you seeing a World Refugee Day poster? Glad that that's up there. It's really a pleasure to be part of this. And to Chris's point, I am going to look at the global, the Canadian, and the local today. I'm a geographer by training here at York University. So let's start ever so briefly with a global view of displacement. We've heard some of the numbers from both Yusuf and Chris. And they are staggering. I think as much as we know we have more than 26 million refugees, we also have to remember that many people live in refugee-like conditions and they don't qualify, or they might not meet the exact definition for reasons Yusuf pointed out. It could be drought, it could be famine, there could be environmental crises, even a hurricane that displaces someone. But there are a lot of people missing from these numbers as well. But one number I would like to leave you with, or at least introduce, is the idea that more than 85% of refugees in the world live in global south locations. That might include the Middle East, as we sometimes call it, perhaps geographically in error, but places where they're close to their countries of origin, but still displaced in countries that are not always, with all that many resources to spare, let's say. So I want to bring that into view, because we often think of refugees in the Canadian context, and not everyone can come, as Chris pointed out. The pattern of extended exile is another number I want to dwell on for just a moment, because we think of displacement as an event in a sense. Maybe it happens, lasts for a couple of months, a couple of years, but in fact, the average number of years a person holds refugee status in the world is currently 20 years. So that is almost a generation of potential displacement. Now that is an average. We know that, I can say from my own experience, the first refugee camp I ever went into was the Dadaab complex. The first camp built was IFO, and I got to volunteer for a faith organization while in Kenya to help construct a feeding center for children. But since that time, and as a professor, I've asked my students, how can a temporary stopgap measure that was only supposed to be brief, how can that camp still be there 29 years later? So I want to just really reinforce the protracted nature that Chris alluded to. From a Canadian perspective, I'm going to touch on this very briefly in my remaining 4.5 minutes. And then I want to touch on, and I look forward to learning hugely from the other panelists on this and the subsequent panels. What can we do through our faith communities, through our fundraising efforts, in daily encounters, whether through our work or through our role as just civil society? So ever so briefly, sorry, play from current slide. Sorry about that. The UNHCR has called the last decade of displacement. More than 100 million people have been displaced. And to points made earlier, only a fraction have found a solution, which is UNHCR's terminology for these durable solutions Chris was speaking about. So that's less than 4%. So this underscores that protracted nature that I was just referring to. And these lives on hold are an invisible, largely invisible, but very important issue for us to kind of wrap our heads around and our hearts around. Moving to the Canadian context, and again, I'm moving ever so quickly here. We have had some good news in the last couple of days from Immigration Minister Mendicino, who's announced some increases. But I just want to say that we've seen some good shifts overall. If you're not familiar with these acronyms, let me quickly run through them. The GAR is the Government Assisted Refugee. And in 2010, that number, which has been the same since the 1990s, 7,500, has moved up to 10,100 in 2020. Chris was just briefing me before this call that we are looking at approximately 13,000 in the next few years. So we're going to see a sizable increase there. PSR is privately sponsored refugees. Again, in 2010, about 4,500, even a little bit less, moving up considerably, more than fourfold increase. And that number has increased again in 2021. It's set to increase a little bit more, but not as dramatically as it has. And then the BVOR category, we won't get into the details of what that stands for, except to say that it's a blended version of the GAR and the PSR. It's a category introduced in 2013, so we don't have all that much data on it. But certainly increases in protection spaces should be applauded. I want to mention that because this government has done a lot to expand the protection space, especially for people who are in those protracted situations. But a challenge that we might be able to still put out there, can the Canadian government ensure support for the same number of GARs, government assisted, as PSRs? We know that PSRs are private citizens, permanent residents who put their money in and support refugees for a year. Can we increase and match with government money the numbers there? So that's one challenge for government. Moving quickly to local, and again, very brief presentation, so pardon the speed at which things are going. But I wanted to introduce research assistants on a team that I'm working on that's looking at why sponsors in Canada continue, and faith communities, of course, are leaders in this effort, continue to support and sponsor refugees year after year after year. For 40 years, more than 325,000 refugees and their families have come to Canada. And what we found, what we were told by more than 100 people who came formerly as sponsored refugees or who are long-term seasoned sponsors, we might call them, is that sponsorship is a community practice. It's a way of locally enacting global social justice, connecting the local and the global through bringing a refugee family or person to Canada from a camp, from a war zone, from a place where human rights atrocities prevail. So what can we do? Just to wrap up here, we can lobby our governments for stronger refugee resettlement commitments. We can applaud them for what they have done. And I think many of us, and we're going to hear many more precise, detailed, day-to-day efforts that are happening, but funding faith-based and other organizations supporting refugees abroad, those who are invisible in those protracted refugee situations. They need our attention and our help. But we also need to unsettle ourselves and to reach out to newcomers, not just refugees, but immigrants, maybe people that we've just never spoken to, people who may be new in our community, on a daily basis. I think to create stronger communities that can combat racism and Islamophobia, we need to do more. And in the wake of the London tragedy earlier this month, I hope we will do more. Finally, to Mary's point earlier, we need to recognize the displacement of Indigenous peoples as colonial and contemporary violence, and to make change with them on the lands they share with us. So thanks so much to everyone for your attention, and I look forward to the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hyman. And staying now as we merge from transition from global to local, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce my sector colleague, Peggy Lowe, the Program Director of Success. Peggy is the Director of Success, Settlement and Family Services, which serves approximately 18,000 immigrants and refugees every year. With a background in psychology and education counseling, she's worked both in senior management as well as frontline roles to support newcomers in the Greater Vancouver area. She's passionate about collaborative leadership that takes into account a trauma-informed lens and inclusive anti-oppression practices. Peggy's going to talk a bit about how Success has responded to refugee resettlement during this pandemic. Over to you, Peggy.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good evening, everybody. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you this evening from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm grateful to the Indigenous people of Turtle Island who have care of this land since time immemorial. We stand with them in solidarity as we all mourn the loss of the 215 children found at the former Kamloops Residential School and the many more children that we are hearing about increasingly at the site of other former residential schools. As we celebrate World Refugee Day today, let us also recall that tomorrow is the National Indigenous Peoples Day and our responsibility in knowing the Truth and Reconciliation reports and its 94 calls to actions. Success recognizes and acknowledges our community shares history of injustice and discriminations, and uphold that is our joint responsibility to actively work towards achieving healthy and inclusive communities and environments. Today, as we observe World Refugee Day, we can't help but consider the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the suspension of resettlement, along with stay-at-home orders and border shutdowns, and how this has impacted many refugees who have been forced to leave their home country to find safety. We also know that refugees who are recently resettled continue to experience post-arrival challenges that put them at great health risk. On March 17, 2020, the IOM, International Organizations of Migrations, and UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioners for Refugees, announced that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, any travel related to refugees resettlement would be suspended. That includes government-sponsored and privately sponsored refugees to Canada. The suspension of resettlement, along with stay-at-home orders and border shutdowns, have important ramifications for refugees. As a global leader in resettlement, Canada was set to bring in over 30,000 refugees in Canada last year. However, because of the pandemic, there were only 7,000 resettled last year. So what caused the low resettlement numbers? So part of it is due to IOM Canadian orientation about programs going virtual. Refugees not getting the exit permit in time due to COVID, health, and safety restrictions. flight cancellations, longer journey, limited flight options, more transit flight before landing in Canada, COVID testing before boarding and also at the point of entry, and the mandatory 14-day self-quarantine. According to some of the statistics provided by Success Community Airports Newcomers Network, CAN, between April 2020 and March 2021, 666 RAP clients arrived at the Vancouver International Airport, which is a reduction of 325% from the previous year. The majority of the RAP clients came from Syria, Somalia, Eritrea, Iraq, and Iran. The health policy and programs enacted by the federal and provincial government have significantly affected how society operates at both the individual and community levels. Similarly to other infectious diseases, COVID-19 impact the more vulnerable and marginalized populations disproportionately, highlights the inequality in access to care and the importance of social determinant of health. Health insurance, health literacy, personal protective equipment and testing capacity, living conditions, and personal circumstances, work circumstances, and underlying medical and mental health conditions, and lower access to care, stigma, and perceived discriminations, closure of public spaces such as schools and libraries, closures of community and religious centers, and closures of borders all added to the compounding challenges faced by resettled refugees. At this time, much is unknown about how long COVID-19 will challenge the way we live our lives. Whether for this pandemic or the next global health emergency, understanding how to best support the most vulnerable needs continue to be a high priority. The pandemic isn't over yet, but as we are slowly returning to more of what life used to look like before all of this, it continues to be paramount to support refugee health during and post-pandemic. So what can community organizations, social service agencies do to support? Here are some of the things we do as Success. Share COVID-19 information and resources and provide services that are culturally responsive and appropriate for community, work, school, and home setting. Verbal communications such as phone or video calls, communication via text messages are effective and preferred communication methods. Collaborate with local health authority to support health education efforts and to deliver key prevention messages. Work with refugees and explain what contact tracing is and what public health worker needs to find people and why public health worker needs to find people who have come into contact with someone who has COVID. Work with community health workers in refugees community to educate people about COVID-19, discuss strategy on how to safely isolate or quarantine within the household when needed, and refer refugees to free or low-cost services. Work with partners to connect refugees with the healthcare and community resources they need when they become sick and test positive for COVID. That includes medications, healthcare provider, and mental health services. In terms of facilitating refugees' access to COVID-19 vaccine, here are the things that we can do. Ensure availability of culturally and linguistically appropriate vaccination materials tailored for refugees populations. Share and disseminate culturally sensitive resources and materials about vaccinations. Develop partnership with community organizations such as local pharmacy, community center, housing units, and school to host vaccination clinic. Learn about individuals and community-level barriers to COVID-19 vaccinations, including limit access to vaccination information and cite understandable distrust of the systems based on historical experiences, challenges in navigating vaccination registrations, language barriers, work conflicts, cultural and religious belief, and misinformation about vaccine. And then work with partners and stakeholders and community to reduce vaccine hesitancy. an identified trust member of the refugees community to serve as a vaccine champion and proactively refer individuals to relevant vaccination resources. Despite barriers faced by refugees resettled in Canada, they have the support of social service agencies and community groups. The federal, provincial, and municipal government should continue collaborating with this group in the COVID-19 response effort. Let's continue to work together to put this pandemic behind us in a good way that takes into account the very important work of social justice that we are called to do from a trauma-informed, anti-oppressive lens. Even though someone may have had a refugee's experience, they are all, first of all, resilient, because the bottom line is they are still here. And additionally, they have tremendous amount of skills, ability, and potential that can be supported, developed, and help them to get back on their feet. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Our last panelist for this panel is Azim Taya, the Executive Director of the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services. ISS of BC, had the great pleasure to really get to know the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services during the 2015-2016 Operation Syrian Refugee. And we consider the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services a great collaborative partner that has continued to this day help us welcome resettled refugees from abroad. Azim, as I said, is the executive director. He is the Aspire Community Services, actualizing self-reliance by providing inspiration, resources, and education, aim at promoting client development and independence. The Aspire Refugee Assistance Program focuses on the unique challenges refugees face during their settlement process. He's also the founding board member of Roots Community Health Center, partnering with local family physicians and a primary healthcare network partners to develop a new community health center for refugees and immigrants facing multiple barriers in Canada's fastest growing city, Surrey. Without further ado, over to you, Azim.
Thank you very much, Chris and Yusuf. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We acknowledge that MFBCS is hosted on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzik, Kwiketlam, Kwantlen, Kaikat, and Twasan First Nations. We thank the Coast Salish peoples of Turtle Island for their stewardship and care for this land. And we also share the grief of the findings of the residential school remains of the 215 children. Today, we find ourselves in the 1442 year of the Islamic calendar. The start of this calendar marks the commemoration of Hijrah, or migration, when Muslim refugees were forced from their homes in Mecca to seek refuge in Medina. As a result, our Prophet Muhammad was a refugee. The welcoming and support of refugees, as well as the sympathy and mercy for them, no matter their faith or background, is built into the DNA of Islam. MFBCS is a grassroots community organization established in 2010 and now operates nationally in British Columbia and Ontario. Our mission is to turn the tables of hunger and provide social services support not only to our community members, but also to all Canadians. We do this by supporting our clients in becoming self-sufficient, dignified members of Canadian society, by providing immediate food assistance through our food bank operations and offering a holistic range of support services through our Aspire community programs, including advocating self-reliance by providing case management, counseling, employment, and mental health support, training, youth development, and capacity building. Our organization focuses on initiatives that revolve around addressing food insecurity, cultural sensitive interventions for mental and physical health, employment skills development, and capacity building for youth. Our social services include the case management, where we have caseworkers that are trained on trauma-informed practices, best practices to help immigrants, especially refugees, to go through the various challenges and settle down and become self-reliant. Counseling on mental health issues, employment readiness programs, refugee youth and senior support, and special needs support for at-risk populations. MFBCS has been helping refugees since 2010. As Canada, as Jennifer pointed out, Canada has been involved in settling refugees for many years, for decades. And when huge number of refugees arrived from Syria in 2015, 2016, MFBCS has been one of the organizations at the forefront of helping majority of the Syrian refugees adapt and resettle in BC. From initially helping with immediate necessities through our food bank to setting up comprehensive programming towards creating financial self-reliance and employment readiness. With hundreds of active volunteers, we've managed to help over 80% of Syrian refugees in BC and extensively collaborate with local partners, including ISSBC, Success, Diversity, Work BC, and BCMA, Guildford Islamic Center, and different organizations addressing the pressing issues of that refugees face. Alhamdulillah, many of our clients are employed in different organizations. Some have started and established successful businesses, and others are working in the not-for-profit sector, assisting others. These enormous efforts have been formally recognized by various municipalities of Premier Horgan and Prime Minister Trudeau. Non-profits are very much the immune system of our society. When compromised, the chaos, hardships, and uncertainty that erupts as a result can directly contribute to difficult situations. We generally serve an essential role in keeping our communities' health, education, economy, and outlook on an upward trajectory. However, the positive impact we play in times of crisis is now all the more necessary. The current pandemic, as stated by the previous speakers, is stressing out our communities, and especially our not-for-profit sector and MFBCS in numerous ways. The well-being of staff, volunteers, elders, the sick, newcomers, and those living paycheck by paycheck must remain our top priority. But amidst the confusion, fear, demand for services is surging, and resources can easily become overextended. This pandemic for some conjures flashbacks to traumatic survival experiences in refugee camps. Thousands of refugees across the lower mainland rely on us to fill in gaps in accessing the latest information on how to best navigate the pandemic, particularly when dissemination of information about the virus is often conducted in advanced English by officials through online mediums. Mental health wellness is very important, especially during this pandemic, as we see an increase in people struggling with mental health and anxiety. Our team of frontline social workers, counselors, and caseworkers are working very hard in this area. We keep persevering in our mission to support refugees. Our personal and organizational beliefs are what have kept our team focused on supporting those vulnerable members of our community. I would like to thank all the frontline workers, including our staff, volunteers, and partner organizations and agencies, for continuing to work very hard all through the COVID-19 pandemic. We have not closed our doors even in the earlier days when there was so much uncertainty. I want to thank each and everyone for giving me the opportunity to talk about the Muslim Food Bank and Community Service Society. And at this point, I hand it back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So that concludes our first panel this evening, and I will pass it on to Joseph, who will be moderating our second panel. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was excellent, everyone. Really appreciate you sharing your voices. Just to introduce the second panel, I'm going to let Bahar do that, and then I'll take it from there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for that first panel. What a dynamic group, and we learned a lot of what's happening locally and globally. I'd like to introduce the moderator for our next session. Yusuf is a social entrepreneur with a background in business management and positive psychology from UBC. His passion is the intersection of technology and social justice. I'll just pass it over to you, Yusuf.
Thank you so much, Bahar. And in my social work with the Islam Unraveled Anti-Racism Initiative and Foundation for a Path Forward, as well as the BC Muslim Association, one thing I found is that in a lot of the NGOs here in BC, there's such amazing individuals. They are people who are dedicating their time, their energy, their lives to supporting others. Many of these organizations are based on faith community principles. The topic of today's panel is actually, or the second panel today, is Interfaith Communities' History of Supporting Refugees, as well as the importance of doing so to these faith communities. As Azim mentioned, one of the seminal moments in Islamic history was when the early Muslims became refugees themselves, including the Prophet Muhammad, when they left from Mecca because they were being persecuted to Medina to receive safety. Other faith traditions have similar events in their founding. For instance, in Judaism, very famously, the incident of the Exodus, where Moses, peace be upon him, brought the Jewish people out of Egypt to seek safety and security. Or even later on when they returned from Babylon after being sent there as refugees when the Romans invaded. In Christianity, the early Christian apostles and prophets, they were sent out of the Holy Land because of the events following the time of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Many resettled in Turkey, as many refugees now do today as well. So there's a shared history of addressing concerns from faith perspectives because many of our faiths have experienced that. I'm going to now introduce our first speaker for this panel. So Rianne Walker is the lead minister of St. Andrew Wesley's United Church. She is, which is in downtown Vancouver. She brings a love of nurturing and the spirit of development to those around her and is passionate about the power of spiritual practice and community to transform suffering in both our local communities and communities over the world. Rianne has a Master's of Public and Pastoral Leadership from Vancouver School of Theology, an MA in Philosophy, Religion and Literature from Sussex University, and a BA in Philosophy and Creative Writing from UVic. She's also previously served as lead minister at Heartwood Community Cafe, which was an LGBTQ social enterprise run by Trinity United. We're very honored to have you here with us, Rianne. Please, let's hear from your voice.
Thank you so much. And I'm so honored and touched that our church is able to be part of this panel and to hear about the good work that is going on. Thank you for including us. And I am located in the traditional and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo Nation, like Asim. And our church is located on Coast Salish land, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And we hold those communities in prayer and in reconciliation. So Yusuf, thank you. You did sort of bring about what all of our siblings, our Muslim siblings, Jewish siblings, where we all have these stories around refugee, but we also, I think, share the spiritual practice of hospitality and how greeting the stranger, we encounter the Holy One in some form. And so that sense of kinship through hospitality, I think, perhaps is one of the reasons faith organizations are drawn to support refugee work. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about why St. Andrews Wesley has gotten involved in what we've been up to. So I'm representing really a group of 14 tireless volunteers in our church who have been doing this work for about 11 years. And one of the advantages of being the United Church of Canada at the moment is that we, as an organization, have had some concentrated involvement with refugee sponsorship since the 1970s, where we engaged in that work in response to the migration of Vietnam War refugees. And in that time, the government of Canada made the United Church of Canada a sponsorship agreement holder, and that was centralized through the national office in Toronto. But practically speaking, what that means is that whether you are a church of 30 people in northern BC or a church of 400 in Vancouver, you have some of the administrative support and resources to sponsor a refugee and manage the demanding and sometimes confusing paperwork and procedures that it takes. It also means that as a church, we can be poised to support and accompany refugees when crisis strikes. And so, for example, in 2015, in the beginning of the Syrian refugee crisis, the government of Canada was able to provide access to us for 750 refugees right in the beginning, and for that call to go out across the country to United Churches. Our particular journey, though, began in November of 2010 when there was an urgent call to sponsor a Palestinian family living in the Al Hol refugee camp in Syria. And our current team leader, former educator Donna Scora, just felt called to gather folks in the congregation right after the worship service to see if there was enough people to make a team. And there most certainly was. And so because of her, we have a very active team of 14 people who work on sponsorship and accompaniment. And to date, those folks have sponsored 15 refugees from Syria, Iraq, and Uganda. But one of the interesting things that we noted in that work is, much like all of us, I think we all thrive in like a support and love of community. We noticed there was some additional work we could be doing too. So we started to come into contact with people who were government sponsors and who maybe had arrived already, but maybe didn't have the community supports around them. So we increased that work to providing accompaniment to 20 newcomers. And those folks were from Syria, Afghanistan, Uganda, Brazil, Nigeria. And a lot of that role was, connecting people to education or childcare if it was a family, housing support if they were LGBTQ. It was introducing them to other LGBTQ community where they knew they would be safe and accepted. And so we've learned some beautiful lessons about just humanity, about how we all need that friendship and that safe place to cry, to talk, to dream. And so that's been part of the work as well. We currently have 8 people that we're desperately awaiting during this COVID time, as many of you have spoken to. The sponsorship process is taking much longer. And so right now, members of the team are calling or texting or emailing the sponsorees during this time to help them know that we are still thinking of them, working on their application, and looking at housing, looking at education support, so that they know when they get here, we are excited and ready to support them in their transition. So if you're somebody listening to this panel and you've never sponsored, in addition to the paperwork, what happens generally in our case is once we get confirmation that someone's arriving, the team kicks into gear, secures accommodation, furnishes the apartment, goes to the airport to pick people up, and plans the welcome potluck. And in that first week of arrival, a lot of the support is quite practical, getting ID, social insurance number, and orienting folks to the transit system or the grocery stores. And really understanding that each person that arrives is bringing their own goals, their own hopes, their own skill sets, and also their own traumas. And we've really benefited from having a former social worker on the refugee team. 2 other quick pieces. One, our church, as Yusuf mentioned, supports the full inclusion of LGBTQ plus folks. And so the Canadian government has been asking us to accompany LGBTQ plus refugees as part of the sponsorship program. And this has been a beautiful match for us. We have a LGBTQ group in the church, and of course on our board and in our committees as well. And having folks who can provide some specific context about what it's like to be out in Vancouver, and to be able to talk to specific service providers and supports that are for the LGBT community has really been a great bridge. And we're feeling very passionate about this work because I know many of you know, but just for perspective, 77 countries worldwide criminalize same-sex activity, 7 of them with the death penalty. And we've heard from the refugees that we sponsor many personal stories about how they're at much higher risk for persecution, sexual and physical violence, and attacks in the camps and when they're in these transition states. And that's even from their own families as well. So there's some extra urgency there for us. Finally, we've been really lucky. There are so many organizations, as we see on this call, that make great partners who can provide us with information that we might not know, and vice versa. And so when we're working together, we really see the profound effect of that. So we're grateful for folks like the Rainbow Foundation of Hope or the matching grants we've had from the Shapiro Foundation. And one of our key partners now is Rainbow Refugee Vancouver, who's been a huge force for good, both in terms of helping with paperwork and support, but they're just also tireless in terms of working on the issue. And so we've got a formal partnership with them where we're hoping to do some joint mentoring as they create private sponsorship circles. Some of our committee members can provide some support, some mentoring as people go through their first sponsorship. And also it can provide some time for us to all grow and share these skill sets. And I think that's really, really critical. As I mentioned, we are waiting for 8 people that we really hope will start to arrive by the end of this year. And we're continuing to raise money. We've committed $340,000 for the next 3 years of sponsorship. But if anyone is considering it from a personal point of view, maybe I'll leave on this. When I ask our volunteer refugee team what they've learned from refugee sponsorship, it almost always brings them to tears because we are changed by each other. It's very clear that the roles could easily be reversed. And I think the spiritual nature of this work is that it puts us in touch with what I think is our essential humanity. Refugee sponsorship is most definitely not charity work, it is justice work. And it's believing that we as a collective community have the ability to right the moral wrong that anyone should have to flee for their life from their place of birth or community. And so I hope we will continue to do this work together and to take it into the global world so that we actually build a planet that is just and peaceful and abundant for all. Thank you so much for having me on this panel tonight.
Thank you, Ram. It's amazing to have you and the awesome work that you're doing. It's so appreciated. I'm sure that one of the things that it's powerful. It's when people from other cultures, communities, orientations, backgrounds are helped and supported by people who might not share their beliefs or their previous understandings or things, but out of love and humanity and their own principles do. You know, in the Bible, in Exodus, I think it's 23 something, 9 maybe, it says, do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels that you used to be foreigners, right? So to have that connection it's very awesome. And we appreciate you sharing your words with us today. Thank you. And to continue on with this important theme, I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Mufti Asim Rashid. Mufti Asim is an internationally renowned Islamic scholar and speaker. He is the founder of Al Ihsan Educational Foundation here in British Columbia, which offers one of the only higher level Islamic education programs in BC and on the West Coast, actually. Mufti Asim is also the founder of Islam Unraveled. We are an anti-racist education and engagement organization which encourages communities to learn and live together in peace. Mufti Asim, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Greetings and welcome to all of you, and thank you for sharing your work. Some very important data and facts were conveyed. Those statistics are extremely important for anyone who is engaged in this work and actually wants to get a pulse on what's happening in this space, especially in Canada. And also, it's great to be able to have a platform where faith-based organizations can not only share with each other what what they have done, what they are doing, but also provide a motivation for each other. Some really great work and accomplishments, achievements have been shared, and I hope that going into the future there can be more collaborative efforts between faith-based groups, because ultimately, in my mind, interfaith dialogue is most useful and most productive when it brings people together for specific projects that they're good for humanity, for society, or a specific sector of society. They're providing real value to people outside the organizations, and not just for people to sit down and talk. And that's always a great thing. But there are so many urgent causes, as we speak, that there's so much work that we must do and that we need to do, and a lot of it requires collaboration between organizations. And as the previous speaker rightfully said, that there is definitely a very strong spiritual element when it comes to dealing with refugee crises around the world, where each religion has its own sort of set of teachings that not only promotes looking after people that are in some form of distress, but it also renders it to be a moral obligation to look after those people. I'll give you a couple of very quick references from the Islamic tradition. Muslims' first experience with migration was when they had to leave Mecca due to religious persecution. But this is not what is famously known as the migration, that the hijrah in Arabic, it's called. The first exposure to being immigrants was when the Muslims had to leave. A large number of them had to leave and go to Africa from Mecca. And because the persecution in Mecca had gone to a level where it was not possible to tolerate it for many people. It was basically either leave Islam or be killed, and many people were killed. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told his people that, look, you can migrate, or you should migrate to Abyssinia, which is modern day Ethiopia. And he said, there's a just king there. This king is fair. He looks after people. He does not discriminate, even though Abyssinia at that time was a completely Christian country. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, praised him for his care, for his humanity, for his justice. He's not going to discriminate between people because of their religion. He gives everyone the same type of importance. And so the Muslims migrated. After a few years, they did come back. In one case, there was false news that was sort of spread out in Abyssinia that everything is okay, you can come back. And this was an effort on behalf of the oppressive forces in Mecca to bring these people back and then kill them. So when they came back or on the way back, and they found out nothing has really improved, so they went back again. Then it was a few years after this that the Muslims were told to migrate to Medina, and so now you have Muslims that are once again going through the experience as migrants themselves, but then on the other side also you have Muslims that are welcoming them, and the experiences that are documented about that time, how difficult it was for people to leave their countries. It's very much the same in many parts of the world where we are receiving immigrants from, that there are people that are bent on persecuting them, taking their lives, hurting them, destroying them, and making the process of leaving and getting out of that extremely, extremely difficult. So there are hundreds of incidents in our history where people were simply not allowed to go, but they persisted, they persevered, they endured all kinds of things. And so on one side, getting out of that situation, on the other side, coming to Medina, which had become like a hub immigrants. And the people of Medina had actually invited the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all his followers in Mecca, and they really they did extraordinary things. At that time, and for a long time afterwards, there were no hotels, motels, or any kind of what you might say state-sponsored accommodations. It was just everyone is looking out for everyone else. So the people in Medina, they not only welcomed these immigrants from Mecca, but rather they divided their wealth. They would give them literally half of their property, half of the money they had. They would make them as partners, 50% partners in their businesses. They would give them their land, half of their lands. It was just incredible, the amount of hospitality that was displayed at that time. And anytime a newcomer would come to Medina, whether it was for a short duration or for a prolonged stay, there were people constantly. The main hub for all of this was the mosque. Everyone would converge and meet at the mosque. So whenever it was noticed that there's a new person in the congregation, somebody would go up to them and say, "Hey, how are you? Where are you from? What can we do for you? Come and stay with me." And these people hosted people in their homes for as long as it took, as long as it was necessary for the visitor. And there were occasions where a visitor would just pop up. These people would not announce their arrival. They would just come. And when the Prophet, peace be upon him, noticed these newcomers, he would sometimes, if somebody didn't step up right away, he would just announce that, "Who will take care of this person? They are a guest of God. Who will look after them?" And right away, people would volunteer and say, "Yes, I'll take him." On one occasion, the companion of the Prophet who volunteered to take this guest home, he had nothing to eat at home himself. He wasn't sure how he's going to make this work, but he said, "I'm going to do this." So when he comes home and he asks his wife, "Is there anything to eat? We have a guest." She said, "No, there's nothing for you and I. You and I don't have anything. There's just a little bit of food for the kids. And you and I are going to have to spend the night hungry." So he said, "Just lull the kids to sleep, read something to them, do something that'll just make them sleepy, let them fall asleep. And if there is just enough for them, we'll take that and we'll share it with the guest." So how do you eat, together at the table or at the, at the sufra, as we call it, when there's, you're not eating and the guest is not going to feel comfortable. So he said, "When we start to eat, I want you to dim the light or turn out the lantern, and I'll just keep motioning with my hands that I'm eating, and the guest will have all of the food." So this was a part of the lifestyle. It was a matter of honor. It was a matter of, great dignity for someone to be able to serve someone who is not able to look after themselves. And as I said, there were no hotels. There was nothing like that. It was that individuals in the community were so strongly motivated to do this that they would feel ashamed if they did not have this chance. And no one was exempt from this, not the leaders of the communities. Even after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this tradition continued for a long time, for generations. So to be able to participate in initiatives where we are hosting people, for Muslims especially, it's very close to our hearts, because traditionally we have been people who have migrated, and we have been people who have welcomed the migrants. And so and today remains very much the same. It's the same sort of situation. So if we do have the opportunity to contribute to a system that is helping people come out of oppression, and what an advantage, and what a privilege to be in a country that is at the forefront of this to the best of their ability. They're utilizing resources, and they're proud of it. And really, that's one of the things that, we feel very, very proud to be a part of. It's one of the things that really makes our country stand out amongst many other things. So the opportunities are here today. They will be here tomorrow, but it's really about how much we can participate and how soon we can participate. And really, we should, our message to the people around the world is that, we're not welcoming you because we think we're better than you, or because we might have some advantages over you. Absolutely not. These people, some of the people that are fleeing from these countries, are extremely wealthy in those countries. They're extremely well off. They're very prominent people in their communities. When we go and we meet them and we learn their backgrounds, some of them are extremely educated. It's just a matter of us connecting with them at the level of human beings and showing them that, look, this experience of yours has been traumatic. It has been devastating in many cases. You've seen a lot, but you are in no way less than us. And we welcome you with open arms. And you've been doing wonderful things in your homelands, and we're sure that you will be great, productive and contributing citizens of our society as well. So those were just a few thoughts and a few reflections. Thank you, Yusuf, for bringing me in on this platform. Honored to be here. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Shukriya, Mufti Asam. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice and your perspective and to share from the heart your feelings. I think everyone enjoyed that, and the lessons that our faith teaches and shares. For instance, I'll share with everyone, there's a saying of the prophet that the most beloved to God are those who are the most beneficial to people. So that's everyone on this call today. So you are beloved to God in the actions that we're doing. And we thank you, Mufti Asam, and we thank all our speakers for what they have been dedicating their lives to. Our next guest, and who I'm very excited to have here with us all the way from Toronto. So it's very late for you, Elise, but appreciate you being here. So Elise Herzig is the Executive Director of JIAS Toronto, which is the Jewish Immigrant Aid Services Toronto. It is a community and government supported settlement agency that welcomes, supports, and helps integrate diverse immigrants and refugees to build a strong and inclusive Canada. Just as Mufti Asam was just saying, which values all newcomers. JIAS Toronto is the only Jewish settlement agency with sponsorship agreement holder status in Canada. This status gives them the ability to work with Canadian citizens to sponsor refugees. And since 2015, they have worked with over 25 synagogues across the country and other generous community partners to bring over 350 refugees to our safe haven here. Elise, please, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. And it's really a joy to be on this panel today. Wow, it's World Refugee Day. And I am a daughter of somebody who came to Canada as a refugee. My father was a Holocaust survivor, and the UN declared that he and his family were refugees before they came to Canada. So I feel that I'm in a very special place speaking with these wonderful speakers, and I find listening to all of them, I hear a lot of stories that are very similar to the work we do at JIAS. So first of all, I think that the people that came together today, while we might come from different backgrounds and live in different cities, we all work in sacred spaces where we have a deep caring and love to help others. And I think we oftentimes focus on our differences, but this ability to want to come together to do good and to help others in need is really something that binds us in a way, as Mufti Asim said, it brings us when we're helping the vulnerable. I think it really elevates all of us. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from each other. And when I was listening to Mary Point speak from the Indigenous lens, the Indigenous ways of knowing and their knowledge really teaches us a lot about building community and respecting each group for their individuality and their cultures. And this is what we do every day at JIAS Toronto. We were founded close to 99 years ago to help refugees that were fleeing Europe from persecution, Jewish people leaving primarily Eastern Europe. Today, close to 100 years later, we help refugees from around the world trying to find a safe haven, which we're so proud of, that is Canada. The lessons that we've learned from the refugees that came to Canada after the Holocaust are the refugees who've gone through the traumas that they have, and many of them are still going through trauma. They need to have three things to really help adapt in their new place in a healthy way. They need a sense of safety, they need a sense of control, and they need to feel like they've got an opportunity to make choices. And we use this trauma-informed lens in all the work that we do, in all the programming we do, and all the support we do. I think as one of the speakers was saying that while we focus on the vulnerability of the refugees, there is tremendous resilience in the people that we see, tremendous hope for the future. And I can say with full certainty that every single one of our staff members and our volunteers that work with the refugee community all feel elevated because of the work that they do, and they become better versions of themselves. And in many ways, I think the type of Canadian that they want to be. The work that we do, while we have an incredible team of frontline workers that support refugees, and whether it's the people that we have that through the process of actually helping the sponsorship of refugees to helping people before they come here and the families that come here once they're here, and we do a lot of work with government assisted refugees, the GARs. One of the things that's very clear is that we can't do this alone. We are highly dependent on the incredible support we get from volunteers to support these families. And this is really what I call the welcome wagon, these communities that come together. And I love the fact that we've got one group we work with that has 105 people on their WhatsApp group. That when we have an ask from a volunteer, they post it on that WhatsApp group, and within 5 or 10 minutes, somebody is there willing to come and to help. And it's really quite incredible. And what happens is we're forming champions across Ontario to help each other. And the work that we do with our PSRs are not only through the synagogues we work with, but we've gotten tremendous support from churches and from mosques and from different groups where really people are coming together to help refugees because they know this is a way that they really can save a life. In the Old Testament, the commandment that is repeated most often is to help the stranger. It is repeated 36 times. And when I was once asked why 36, and in Judaism, 36 actually means 2 times life, because that's what the numbers add up to. But it's really because it's not easy to help someone who's different than you. And you actually have to get out of your comfort zone to make someone else comfortable. And I love Mufti Asim's conversations and stories about this couple that was trying so hard to welcome this person into their home and to treat that person with respect and with dignity. And that is what we try and do, and we embed in all of our work. From planning a program to planning any activity with all of our clients, we bring in the values of looking at the respect of the individual, valuing the individual for themselves and for their viewpoints and for their choices that they've made, and trying to look at the holistic needs of our clients. One of the conversations that was talked about earlier was about COVID and how do we work with communities that really recognize the unique aspects of the communities. And we're really honored with the work not only do with all of our clients, but with the Yazidi population that we've been supporting. It's a bit more of a challenging community to support because the government isn't translating any of the vaccine information into Kurmanji. Many of our clients are illiterate, so they can't read Kurmanji. Many of them don't speak English. And so we're forced to find trusted members in the community that we can use as translators to actually reach out to these individuals on a daily basis as the information changes to give them information in a language that they understand. And we've recently run 2 vaccine webinars for this community that we had not only the translators, but we actually had champions within the community where we had refugees speak about their vaccine experience. And so that the community was listening to members of their own community. And so we want to treat the clients that we have in the way that they become experts and they become the peers that for support within the community. And in fact, on Friday, I was working on a mobile clinic for the community because while we've been successful in getting many of the members of this community for first vaccines, we've been having challenges supporting this community recently in getting the vaccine appointments. So we're actually going to be having next Sunday a community vaccination for first and second vaccines with members of the community that can help translate and support the community. So I'd like to just share a little bit for the audience who wasn't on the pre-call the first 10 minutes before we went live. A number of us were talking about how excited we were that there seems to be a sense of hope in the air. You know, summer is coming. Many of us have had our second vaccine, and people were talking about traveling and doing something new. And I'd like to challenge the listeners on today's calls that what have we learned in the last 15 months about after COVID? How have we as organizations changed? How have we individually changed? How have we collectively changed? I can tell you that at JIAS, some of our lessons learned was that when we did our program for the Yazidi community on COVID vaccination, instead of thinking about, okay, we're going to run an event for our community, we asked the question, who else cares about this and how can we help them? And so we invited members of the London Yazidi community, which is a community that we don't serve and we don't support, but we knew that they needed the same information. We then offered to help members from that community book their vaccines because we have an incredible volunteer network. And so we thought, how can our volunteers help members of the same community that maybe are 100 or 200 kilometers away or 300 kilometers away, but they have the same need. And so we started to think in an extended box. And why I say this is COVID has brought a lot of tragedies to the world. And for every family member who has suffered a loss, there are no words that I can say. But it has also brought us to a point where we can think a little bit differently. We can think about our stakeholders in a much wider context. We can think about who else nearby can I help? Who else can I collaborate with? Who else can I maybe help just because we have something that they maybe need? And I really see this as a sacred space where we can help everybody because we all come in with what was said earlier, with those holy intentions to do good. So next year is JIAS Toronto's 100th anniversary, and we're planning on celebrating it by sponsoring 100 refugees. So if people are interested in supporting and helping us in this, that would be great. And if you don't want to help us, but you want to help another group privately sponsor a refugee, we will also help you do that. Because in the end of the day, we're all Canadians and we're all privileged to live in this great country. And anything that we can do to help anybody from coast to coast is really an honor. So thank you for letting me join you today. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the conversations.
Toda, Elise, thank you so much for sharing your voice. Again, you know, the Jewish community has done so much in Canada for refugees, and it's been a strong voice to encourage the government to continuously bring in more. Interestingly enough, in the Talmud, we find a striking teaching within a seemingly mundane legal discussion, which for those of you who are familiar with the Talmud is pretty common. So this is basically regarding the width of pathways, right? It's a common thing in just city development, but rabbis taught that a private path should be 4 cubits, a path from one town to another should be 8, a public road 16, but a road to a city of refuge should be 32. So the great Andalusian Jewish thinker Maimonides said that the court is obliged to straighten roads to cities of refuge, to repair them, to broaden them. They must remove all impediments and obstacles, and bridges should be built over so that as not to delay one who is fleeing to a city of refuge. So there is this kind of deep understanding within the Jewish tradition to do so, to help and facilitate the ease of passage for refugees. Before moving on to our next panel, there's just one thing I wanted to talk about. In one of the roles that we have here with the BC Muslim Association, actually, I'm the Assistant General Secretary there. My colleague on the line, Tariq Tayyab, is a Vice President. We've been honored to support over 60 refugees resettlement paid for ourselves through the organization. to bring them here to British Columbia, to help them with the religious services, with the religious needs. Many of them actually were not Muslim. So what we try to do is follow through on this initiative of helping to bring forth the caring people in Canada to support the most vulnerable people across the world. The BC Muslim Association is actually the largest Muslim organization in British Columbia, representing the majority of the province's 100,000 Sunni Muslims. And what we've seen in our cousins organizations in the Jewish community, in the Christian community, and the Sikh community is this real desire to support the most vulnerable people. And I feel that our faith traditions are what really empower us. I know in the BCMA it does, and I'm sure in other organizations, to keep working in light of a lot of the challenges and darkness in this world, like to have that inner strength, that inner light. I want to thank all the volunteers at the BCMA, our wonderful Director of Social Services, Brother Shaukat Hassan, who is unable to make it here today, but dedicated his life. The man is, I believe, in his early 80s and still 10, 15 hours a day working. So, there's amazing people out there, and I'd love, if everyone can connect with each other, hear each other's stories to help inspire and find solutions. On that note, we really want to highlight what success means for refugees from refugees. So the local perspectives. Today is World Refugee Day, and we're honored to have 5 refugees with us. And the moderator for this panel is my friend Bahar Tahiri from ISS of BC, BC Refugee Hub. She'll be moderating the final panel tonight. So just a bit about Bahar. As a former refugee, she's passionate about advocating for newcomer refugees and aims to ensure that refugee voices are heard and included in program design and delivery, which is a very important concept that includes concepts of anti-racism, inclusion, diversity at the systemic level. The BC Refugee Hub is a one-stop shop capacity building information and training resource for those who are working with and supporting refugees in BC. So for everyone on this call, it's a great resource, and we encourage you to connect, and we'll make that connection as well. But Bahar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Yusuf. Today, as we mark World Refugee Day, we recognize the struggles and celebrate the contributions of refugees. Canada has a strong tradition of welcoming refugees. Many refugees come fleeing war and persecution and have to learn a new language and adapt to a new culture. However, an examination of the results over the past 30 years shows that not only do refugees benefit from safety in Canada, they also embrace the opportunity to build a better life and contribute to the country's economy and society. Data shows that refugees positively contribute to the communities in which they settle. While refugees may have entered Canada needing protection, their situation improves over time, allowing them to achieve outcomes similar to other Canadians, like starting their own businesses. Refugees create jobs for both themselves and other Canadians. 14.4% of refugees are self-employed or business owners. Additionally, refugees embrace Canada and are committed to their communities. They have the highest citizenship rate among all immigrant categories at 89%. These are all positive results linked to the Government of Canada's policies of welcoming refugees and promoting inclusive communities. In this panel, we would like to draw attention to the experiences of former refugees who are making positive contributions to Canada and to their communities locally. Our panelists today have paved their own way to success and now give back to their communities with their empowered voices. I welcome you to be inspired by the success stories of our panelists, enriching our communities and making a difference in our lives. Our first speaker today is Salim Spindari. As a former refugee, Salim has been active in advocating for refugees, immigrants, migrant workers, and other marginalized groups. Salim has presented and continues to present on refugee and migrant worker issues at conferences and forums. He addressed the Senate's Committee on Human Rights and the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health about the resettlement of refugees and the services needed for vulnerable groups. Salim has been involved in various working groups, committees, and boards at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. He is the recipient of the Service Recognition Staff Award from AMSA. Welcome, Salim.
Thank you very much, Bahar. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And hi, Ichka, for everybody participating. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining here today from the unceded territories of the Tuasan and other Coast Salish people. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to live, work, and play on a land that they have called home for time immemorial. My journey starts actually as a refugee fleeing persecution. I'm Kurdish by ethnicity, Muslim by religion, Canadian by nationality. And that's how many refugees come actually with different identities. And for me, I'm proud of all the three identities that I have. I thought I will start with my journey and my contribution, but I would reflect on some of the things that our previous panelists speak. And thank you, Brother Azim, for the reference to the Hijra. And it really set the stage for us of how brotherhood started there. And you know, we all in the Muslim community grew up learning from the value of welcoming refugees and how by giving them the space, how they would be able to flourish. And of course, Mufti Asim, every time when I listen to him, I get inspired to do more. Rian was talking about the Palestinian refugees, and I have been really grateful for having the opportunity to work with members of the United Church, another private sponsorship group, in supporting the Palestinians who are members of the El Hol, who were stranded in the El Hol community. And I closely work with them to support their resettlement in BC. Elias was talking about the support giving to Kurmanji speakers, Yazidi. For me, as a Kurmanji speaker and being a Muslim and supporting the first sponsorship of a Yazidi family through Mosaic sponsorship agreement holder. So I kind of got involved with many of the initiatives there. But my story started actually after fleeing and arriving in Canada as a refugee. I arrived in December, and soon after I realized that ISS of BC and Chris Friesen, through his different initiative, supporting members of different communities, was organizing a needs assessment for members of the Kurdish community in the Lao mainland. And sure enough, I participated in the event, and it was great. Great in a sense that it allowed me, as a newcomer in Canada, 2 months after arrival, to be able to facilitate a discussion at a table. And I knew right then that being able to speak English and having education there, I would be able to participate in discussion. And my journey actually started in participating at different roundtable discussions on recognizing credentials or accrediting credentials for internationally trained professionals until 2004, when Chris kindly shared a posting with me from a sister organization called Mosaic for a settlement worker position. And I started working there from September of 2004. For those who are not familiar with Mosaic, Mosaic is a nonprofit organization, one of the largest in BC and in Canada, I might say, working with a visual that together we advance an inclusive Canada. And that's really what motivated me. I knew that refugees are not really coming to become burden on society, but they bring their strength, they bring their successes. And thank you for Mufti Hassan for highlighting the fact that many of them come bringing their experiences, but then their wealth as well, and everything else to the economy. From day one working in the sector, I realized that we really could do more to include more refugee voices in the sector and in the discussion. And as you know, recently there has been more opportunities for people with lived experiences to come and be part of the conversation. And for us, years ago when I initially started, we could see really a limited number of seats available for refugees. if your refugees were hired by community organization, they tend to be more on the frontline work, management, upper management, executive leadership, and all this really limited with refugees. And even if you look at the political level and places, you would not really see diverse voices there. I knew that I need to do more within the organization, even though it was a refugee-led organization. Our executive director was a refugee himself who came through the WASC program that Brother Yusuf talked about. And, you know, I realized that we were not doing enough to support refugee claimants, and we were not doing enough to support privately sponsored refugees. As community organization, we would always be told that privately sponsored refugees could be sponsored. They are sponsored by sponsorship agreement holder, groups of 5 community groups, and they're the one supporting them. But as settlement organization, we had really limited programs to support them. So I started doing more work with private sponsors, with notable individuals within the different sponsorship agreement holders. I could name Heather McDonald from United Church. I could name some of the people from the Mennonite Central Committee, Jennifer and the rest. And of course, Brother Shaukat Hassan was really involved from the BC Muslim Association before even BCMA became a sponsorship agreement holder. So our work continued supporting refugees and working closely with Palestinian from El Hol, Iraqi refugees, Tibetan newcomers who were sponsored. And then with the Syrian initiative, all of the focus started being on refugees and refugee programming. By my organization, I was asked if I could lead the effort to support refugees. And for me, as a former refugee, I felt that that's really the right thing for me to do. And it's a calling for me to go and use my skill, not only to work with refugees, but maybe hopefully to contribute toward the saving of lives. And whether saving of life could be one individual, 10 or 20 or more. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity that during the initiative, all of a sudden, the whole discussion changed. Unfortunately, government plays a really positive and negative role. Sometimes they have, and one of the negative was with previous governments, you could hear how refugees were jumping the queue or illegal refugees, and some of the words used to give people the fear that refugees are there to get you, refugees are here to violate or rules or regulations. And we knew that that's not the case. Canada has a system for refugee protection and people are seeking protection. The bigger numbers are really overseas, not here. And from early days of refugees coming to BC, or the Liberals, when they made the commitment that they will admit 25,000 refugees within 6 months, I got invited to go to all sorts of discussion, and people were really worried that they will become burden on the community. How can we accommodate 25,000? And the whole discussion all of a sudden changed. And for me, I'm a person who try to use math. I love math, by the way. And I was telling people in my discussions, BC normally gets 10% out of Canada and out of 25,000. So that would be a really small number. And if we divide it further among the different communities in BC, then a community might get 100 or 50 people. Is that a big number? And everybody would tell me, no, actually it's not. And then I will try to compare the number of refugees that Canada admits every year to the number of other immigrants that come, and then try to do a comparison to see whether we have a right to be afraid or not. But what impressed me throughout the discussion, that all of a sudden I could see something that I have never seen before in my life. All of a sudden, I would see a synagogue partnering with a church to sponsor Muslims. So you have a Jewish synagogue partnering with a Christian church to sponsor Muslim refugees. And that was really, it was only happening here in Canada. And I must tell you, it felt really great. So now all of a sudden, we were having conversation to see how we can bring even more together. You know, we know that all of our differences are the reason for why we get into trouble. But now all of a sudden, our differences are reasons for us to get together. And the same for members of the secular communities. They started working with different faith-based organizations to support refugees. And the whole thing changed, and it became transformational for me. But every time when I hear stories of refugees getting stuck somewhere, and I thought, what can we do as individuals or organizations to change things? And then I was encouraging our board to start thinking about Mosaic becoming a sponsorship agreement holder, because we could do way more than just being a participant in conversation, but we could actually take the initiative. And in 2017, Mosaic became a sponsorship agreement holder, and it was one of the programs that I was supervising. And then I heard stories of people from Dadaab and Kenya that was referenced earlier on. And can you imagine for people to be refugees for an indefinite period of time? It's terrible. And then at the same time, so we started, I will try to wrap up, but I have so many more statements to say. We started in an operation called Operation Not Forgotten to bring refugees who were forgotten on Manus and Papua New Guinea, islands offshore of Australia, a country that can do more to sponsor refugees and support them, while they took a really harsh action of turning them away. From September of 2019 until now, Mosaic submitted sponsorship application for more than 200 people. I'm really proud of that initiative that I was part of, and I'm part of now until the end of this month, but I would clearly monitor how it's going to proceed. We are ready to welcome them, but as everybody know, COVID-19 changed things, and we are really hopeful that things would go back to normal, whether the normal is a normal or normal with lesson learned. Thank you. Bahar, over to you.
Thank you, Salim. Thanks so much. And thank you for your insights and your commitment to advocating for refugees and all of the work and all of the initiatives. I have worked closely with Salim on different projects, and yeah, you're involved in so many things and you've done so much. So thank you for sharing your story with us today. Next, I would like to introduce Hiba Alodat. Originally from Syria, Hiba is a youth leader with the Muslim Care Center, which provides daily meals, addresses social and wellness issues, including addiction, recovery, holistic well-being, and social services for vulnerable populations in Vancouver and Surrey. Hiba was the recipient of the Beatty Luminary Scholarship. Welcome, Hiba.
Thank you. I'm really happy to join this event. It's like just hearing about all the different work and different organization, like me coming from, being a refugee to like coming from Jordan and then coming to here as a refugee again. It's like, and really seeing the experience, like, living it, myself as a really young person, like, and seeing the, like, all this work that you guys were talking about was reflected. Like I saw this, I experienced that, the effort that was put in like helping the refugees. And like, for me, just like, I did not feel like we had a lot of different fears, like considering that we're going to a place where we don't know anyone, we're not sure who's going to help us or who's going to take care of us. Even just like for emotional support or just like someone to be there for us, that was not known for us. Like we did not know these things will happen. So when we came and we experienced all this, it was a relief to really see that these things actually exist. You know, like many people before were so afraid to actually experience leaving the countries that they are familiar with and traveling to a different country, or like, you know, being an immigrant in a country that is completely different, like culturally, language, and everything. So like I'm really grateful that we were, like, you know, even as a community today, that we were able to provide that support to all these, like to all of us, to like, you know, me personally and all the people that have been through similar experiences. So yeah, like, so for me, like really success is the fact that we can always look at the effort that we're put in the work, and to acknowledge it, and then really be grateful for that, and always see that. Not like, you know, it's good to sometimes criticize things and really see, oh, like we need to fix this, we need to fix that, but we really need to celebrate as well, like all this, you know, success that, you know, all of us did to support, you know, all, you know, each other as humans in this world. Like, so that's really like what success means to me, as well as, you know, always being inspired and inspire others by the work that you can do, like just like on individual level or organization level. Like for me, I feel like, for example, you know, working with Muslim Care Center, it was a way for me to you know, express that gratitude that I received that support, and I really want to give back that support as well. So that was like a big thing for me, that I had the opportunity to be there for the people who need the help, just like when I was in a situation where I needed the help the most. So that's basically my understanding of success, is that we always look at the effort that was been put, and really appreciate it all time, all the day, all the time. Yeah, there's like that. Yeah. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Hiba. Yeah, so I really want to echo what you said. There's a lot of effort that goes into welcoming refugees, and we do sometimes need to take time to appreciate all the work that's being done. And a lot of the work that is being done is by individuals who are in a similar situation at one time. So folks like Salim, who came to Canada as a refugee, and now he's gone on to do so much. So I'm thank you for making that point. And sometimes we do have to just stand in gratitude and kind of look and see all the work that has been done and is being done, and all the private sponsors from our previous panels. You know, yeah. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your words today. Next, I would like to introduce Naima Ali, the president of the Somali Canadian Society of BC. Naima is a former Somali refugee who is an educator, teacher, and anti-racism researcher. She has a master's degree in education from Otterbein University. Naima is passionate about education, advocacy, youth empowerment, and facilitating allyship to address systemic issues. In 2021, she became the president of the Somali Canadian Society of BC. Welcome, Naima.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. My name is Naima Bashir Ali. Thank you very much for having me today, and happy World Refugee Day. Before I share my success story, I know Bahari introduced me, but I would like to just briefly introduce myself in a different way. I'm married. I have 4 wonderful boys. I'm very happy to say that I'm a proud American and Canadian citizen, and I've been living between Vancouver and Ohio since 2006. Since time immemorial, humans migrated from place to place, and when wars became prevalent, they sought refuge in other communities. So the notions of immigration and or seeking refuge in other communities are as old as human history. I was born in Somalia. I lost my father when I was about 3 years old. My family and I fled Somalia when I was about 4 years old due to civil war. We lived in Kenya, a neighboring country to Somalia, for about 6 years. So I know some of you guys mentioned Dadaab camp. I was in that camp. I've experienced a major traumatic experience as a child due to being a refugee, such as displacement, being in and out of refugee camps, family separations, famine, lack of education, and more. Today, I'm here to share my success story and the struggles I went through to get where I am right now. Most people have their own amazing success stories. One that I'm very familiar with is my story. It began when I first started school for the first time in my life in grade 4. I felt very happy to be able to go to school despite my difficult past as a child refugee in Kenya in Dadaab camp. If I survived in a refugee camp, I knew I could survive against all odds in a new world. I mean, how hard could it really be? All I had to do was learn a new language, which I've already done. You know, I've learned Swahili when I was in Kenya. I had to learn a new culture, which the Western culture was very different from the culture that I was used to from Kenya and Somalia. And then I had to just kind of see how I would be accepted in that environment, in that new world, and see if I would feel a sense of belonging. Well, I remember struggling in school because I didn't know how to read or write. I didn't know the language that my teachers and classmates were speaking. So I felt like I was mute for a while. All I did was smile if I felt like they meant well. And I even won best smile for my in a team that I was in. They only knew I was smiling a lot. I didn't know a lot from this new world I was in, but I knew how to survive and be resilient. I worked very hard, a lot harder than my classmates, because I was open-minded to opportunities. I had a drive to be successful in life and to live a happy life despite my past difficult experience, and willingness to accept things. I do want to say I was blessed to have a support system from my family, some of my teachers and friends who pushed me to be the best version of myself. And some might say I had a little luck of some of the opportunities that were thrown my way. But I knew to never give up, to be very determined. I didn't choose to be a refugee, but I did choose how I responded to the situation I was in, which was to have faith, to keep my family and friends close, and to continue giving people chances, because that's what I felt like I was getting, chances. It's important to give back to my community because I have had people who supported me and advocated for me when I needed the most. So I'm very passionate about helping youth that are refugees and immigrants and youth that are struggling. My work in education has been in schools that have at-risk youth, immigrant youth, and refugees. I'm currently working at BC Muslim School, BCMA, and I do enjoy working there due to having many refugee students as my students. Because once they know that they have someone who cares about them, and I'm talking about refugees, I'm talking about youth that are struggling, they too will believe in themselves, just like I did. I'm currently a volunteer for the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, where I work with the newcomer refugee communities. I work as with their Befriend program and mentorship program. I also work with, volunteer with Tariq and Yusuf for Islam Unraveled. I appreciate the work that they do for the community, such as the anti-racism initiatives and refugee support programs. And as early of this year, I became the president of the Somali Community Society of BC, where we promote the empowerment of Somali youth, families, and communities through a holistic approach to services that include education, community engagement, and mentorship. We believe Somalis are a valuable addition to our community in BC, and our mission is to provide support, guidance, and equal access to opportunities that enable them to their full social and economic integration. Refugees don't want to be refugees, like I said earlier. However, they do want and need people who are caring, who are advocate for them, who are willing to give them chances in life and in the new world that they are calling their world. I'm sorry. If you know someone who is a refugee, please know that they have a unique, amazing story of how they got to be where they currently are. Support them if you can, because we could all use some support in our lives. My work has just started. I hope my work continues for many, many more years. I enjoyed hearing from all the organizations, and I admire all the work that you do. I would love to support your cause. Please let me know how I can help. Thank you so much again for having me today.
Thank you so much, Naima. And to hear about everything you're involved in, I don't know where you have the time, but you're doing so much for the refugee community and specifically for the Somali community. And I will definitely be connecting with you soon for the BC Newcomer Camp, so I'll email you soon. So thank you for being with us today and presenting and talking about your story of success, which is definitely a success story. And I think you are a really great role model for newcomer refugees. So I'm really glad you're working with youth and your focus is youth empowerment and facilitating allyship, specifically with youth. Thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Sharmarki Dubo. Sharmarki is a former refugee who fled civil war in Somalia at the age of 8 and spent 20 years seeking safe haven until Canada offered him a home in 2012. On October 20th, 2018, he was elected as a Victoria City Councillor. Sharmarki is the first Somali Canadian elected to City Council in Canada, as well as the first Black City Councillor elected in Victoria in 152 years. Welcome, Sharmarki.
Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon all of you. And thank you for having me. And I want to give my shout out to Salim, who's a very humble guy who I had the fortunate to work with him many years while I was new to Canada through the Canadian Council for Refugees. And it's great to see you, Naima, and the work you're doing for the Somali community. I really want to begin to acknowledge the territory that I'm joining you from virtually, and I would like to take the time to acknowledge and show my gratitude and respect to the Lungwanganis people whose traditional territory that I work every day, the Songis, Squamish, and Wasanix people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day, and including those of us who came here as refugees, migrants, as settlers, either in this generation or generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, and particularly as war, conflict, persecution from our homeland, or the result of the transatlantic slave trade. We make, and I'm sure you share with me this value, that we make such acknowledgement, not some sort of historical footnote or lip service, but as a commitment to a true and lasting reconciliation with indigenous people, and as newcomers who becoming by the day more influential to find out where we fit in this role and how we can play the role of reconciliation. And I want to speak a bit for the public who's watching before I speak about myself. We use terminology a lot, and language really matters. So people might read an article or might see on their newspaper or might here at the dinner table or at the kitchens, the word is asylum seeker, migrant, refugee, immigrant, undocumented, illegal, irregular, all those languages that people use. One, no human being is illegal to begin with. And terminology is very important. And today we are speaking World Refugee Day. Then it is, I'm not sure if other speakers before me and at the earlier event spoke. If not, then I might repeat again. We have to know when we say refugee person, we're talking about legal terms here, and we're not talking about charity, we're not talking about economic stream, we're not talking about people who plan for many years that they're gonna relocate to another place. So refugees in the definition is people who are forced to leave their home. So as one of the speakers was saying, no one chooses to become refugee or no one chooses to leave their home. So to be a refugee, you must be forced from your home country because of a serious human rights abuses. And you cannot seek protection within your own government or with your own country. And you have to be outside of your home country and have a well-founded fear that you will be persecuted. So that's the concept of when we say someone is refugee. And it's very important to put that into context because the international community and the whole refugee regime is a moral and also a legal aspect of it, that when people show up at your door, then you have to hear their claim. And this takes us back in after the World War II, when world leaders came together and said never again. And after the Holocaust happened, that if any community is persecuted, then we will protect them. And that is the concept when we speak about refugees. It's not, and I like the Naima, how she began that migration is not something that is started right now. And before even the World War I, there was migration. And the concept of accepting refugees is we have to go back to the 1951 convention, Refugee Convention, which gives that parameter and 69 protocol that countries accept refugees. So the reason why the world leaders came, because they were ashamed of what happened. And within that legal framework, there's a very concept principle, which is called non-refoulement, which means that no one should return back to a place where they face persecution and where they face well-founded fear and where they be killed in terms of persecution. And I think that's is a good concept that we remember. And on that, I want to add, which very particular for Canada, and it's called the Singh decision, and is April 4, 1985. And this happened a year and a half before I was born. And this decision was really crucial in the Canadians' history of refugee protection, because the Singh decision, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom protects the fundamental rights of refugees. The court decided that everyone, including refugee claimants, so that means refugee claimants were not still accepted in the process, in sentence that everyone has the right to life, liberty, security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principle of fundamental justice. And refugees claimants are therefore entitled to an oral hearing in accordance with the principle of fundamental justice and international law. And that's why today in Canada, if someone crosses the border, they have the right to be heard. Do they have the right to stay? That's another question. It all depends, again, going back to the legal framework of and other international and domestic laws that if that person has a well-founded fear and other reasons. So I think it's very important to put that context and why refugees end up in other countries. And as Naima and Salim were sharing their personal stories. And today, the majority of refugees worldwide are Muslim. And if you look at where the conflicts are happening, right? And I'm from Somalia, so I'm a Black Muslim and Canadian. As Salim was saying, no one is one thing. We are more than one identity. And it's really important to remember that. Unfortunately, and we see racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitic, populist fear-mongering that really manipulates the public opinion. And I'm not only talking about in Canada, I'm talking about worldwide. And then confuse, because the majority of refugees come from Muslim countries, confuse refugees or scapegoat them as terrorist hotspots. We've seen Trump, Muslim ban, and all the language that certain politicians use. Recently, Denmark wants to export refugees to third countries so that their own do their moral and international obligation. So the world is really shifting as before World War II, the same rhetoric of the anti-Semitic and Holocaust didn't begin in one day. Genocide doesn't start one day. Even Rwanda, the genocide did not start. And it all started in Rwanda by the radio, calling people, cockroaches and using certain language. So, and now we're seeing that and the rise of hate crimes. And I'm really proud and the work Yusuf, Tariq, and Naima, and the whole team of anti-racism and creating awareness about white supremacy and hate is really important as a community, create that awareness and also be persistent, vigilant, and do something and act on it, because history teaches us, and the whole reason why world leaders came together is because of that. And also, just to conclude in the concept that I wanted to put context to it, that although most of the majority refugees could be Muslims, in the Arabic language, which I had fortunate to study a bit when I lived in Egypt, and when you look at the bit of the Islamic values, it is enrooted. Someone was talking about hijrah earlier, but it enrooted in generosity, hospitality, the whole concept of the protecting the human being, preserving dignity, and the whole concept of istijara, the belief for protection, ijara, granting protection, iwa, sheltering, and other variances, the concept of protection, which is the heart and the mandate of the United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees. So even some of the Gulf countries and Islamic countries sometimes forget the tradition of Islamic tradition is actually rooted in the protection of the stranger that comes to your home and how to protect that. And I think that is a very important, as the world is becoming smaller, and we've seen the vaccination. Countries have a lot of vaccination and countries don't have. So countries start having me. And and that's a very dangerous language as well. We could help everyone who is in our home, but also we can help others who are suffering around the world. So how, because of that, because of those history, because of that law, because of that international law, where did my story begin? So as I share a lot of similarity with Naima, when I'm originally from Somalia. I was born in Somalia, no, any other child, and it's amazing. Naima is a mother of 4 children. Always the parent is the ones that look after their children, right? So I didn't know a lot, and my mother, and shout out to all Somali mothers. They are the hardworking, strongest women I ever known. And of course, I'm being biased, but that is a fact. We can argue another time that Somali women are the strongest. And she put myself and my sister on a boat. So, and think about putting some of you, 2 of you children, because we're 6 at my mother's side, on a boat and not knowing and that they're going to be safe, because other boats were being lost at the Indian Ocean, but also people that were going to Yemen as well. So seeing on the radio, hearing BBC Somali radio, that a lot of boats are lost on the ocean, but still trusting God and trusting that they would be safe. And that was my old sister and myself. And when you speak about in conflict area, usually women and children are the highest victim, and when it comes to, and I don't want to go into detail the reasons. So my story began that I didn't know what refugee convention is. I didn't know what rights do I have and all that. So I left Somalia. I was very young, and my country unfortunately developed a state of civil war, and because of the Cold War and colonization and other things and dictatorship, so many reasons why. So politics was always impacted in my life as any other refugees. So I was child, but I've witnessed the pain, the violence, the chaos. But my mother was the one that really protected us, as any other mother anywhere in the world wants safety and a normal childhood for our children. So I end up in a Kenya through, I was the boat people, that's a language that's used. We've seen now a lot of people risking at Europe through Libya and other places. We've seen Vietnamese boats that came to North America. So the history of boat people is not, it didn't begin in 1992. It began way before me. And as Bahar was saying, and Canada has been a place where refugees always came, and we have also dark immigration history. And refugee protection is not immigration, because there's a legal framework on that. So I end up in Kenya, but a different refugee camp than Naima. My refugee camp was near Mombasa. It's called Utanga, and it was, everyone was the same, like, because when you run, and regardless which class you were, now you are in this refugee camp, the houses are similar, food ratio that you line up, the washroom you line up, the water you line up. And I remember there wasn't structural education, so I missed my early education, such as kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and I had to catch up school late. So I don't want to go in detail, but unfortunately, the Kenyan government decided to close that camp, and there was the opportunity either to be relocated to Kakuma, which is at the border to, I believe, in Sudan, and Dadaab, which is the border to Somalia, or repatriation, which is actually the best thing. But the unfortunate is if home is safe, right? repatriation is actually the best durable solution for refugees to return back home and to be safe at home. But sometimes there is no framework or safety net and social net so people could go back. And the other option was resettlement, which is a golden ticket because less than 1% of the refugees are resettled to elsewhere. So we didn't have the opportunity, or dispersed in the country in Kenya as either undocumented or urban context, living in metropolitan cities such as Nairobi or Mombasa or other cities. So we chose to go to Ethiopia, and that was a long journey as any other, the whole border crossing. So that's where I end up, caught up my school, and I was undocumented, and because I wasn't registered through either Ethiopian government or the UNHCR, so I didn't have the papers to really have the permit to stay. But somehow I have to apply some other documents and hustle. But I continue my education, and unfortunately in any other place, there was uprising students, and in 2001, and that was before 9/11, and that's again when the world changed. Islamophobia, the beginning of Islamophobia, the beginning of returning back Muslim refugees, and the whole confusing refugees with tourists, especially refugees are the victims of terrorism. So I flew to Egypt, and before 9/11, and then I had the opportunity to continue my education, and that's where my work as a human rights began after university, and then worked with migrant refugees, then moved to Canada, and that's where I met Salim. I was part of the Canadian Council Refugees Board and worked several agencies and settlement agencies, stood up for refugees, because thanks to Harper government, they made me more activist. Because the day I arrived, seriously, the day I arrived was the day that Jason Kenney closed all the immigration offices around the country. Because my relative in Winnipeg took me the CIC, now known as IRCC, to change the address for my permanent residence. Then they were like, oh, no, actually, we closed because now you have to do it online. You have to send everything through mail or do it online because all the physical offices are closed. Then the whole health cut, in 2012. So thanks to Harper government, they really reactivated me as activist in Canada, and that's how I came to the scene of migrant justice and refugee health card. And I could have went to 9 to 5 my work, but because of Harper government, after 5 p.m. I was activist, and the daytime I was serving my migrant and refugees and paying my bills. So that's then in 2017, I became citizen, and I entertained the idea of what other tools could I use to serve the public and wider public as well, and say thank you to Canada, but serve. And that's when I decided to run for local government. When I got in, and right away, some of the things we've done is that in Victoria, if any refugee comes for the first year, they have a free transit, so they don't pay for transit the whole year. Our youth, younger 19, they have free transit. We are proud of that. So if a refugee family comes and they have a lot of children, that money could go to rent. Housing is very expensive in any community. The LIFE program, which was low-income families to access the recreational facilities, used to be 52 annually. We made it unlimited access because I knew the challenges that 52 is not enough to access recreational annually, so now it's unlimited. At the Business Hub, we helped a lot of Syrian communities to open businesses, business licensing, and helping them navigate. Some of them have now supermarkets, trucks, and other businesses. We are working now, myself and the mayor are co-chairing Welcome City Task Force. And the idea is, strong communities that are connected and are actively include people of all backgrounds, right? So the Welcome City, we want to meet our highest civic and economic potential by unleashing the power of its biggest asset, which is our people. So, and our people includes migrants, includes refugees, and all our backgrounds. So I'm so proud that I am involved in that work, doing this strategy. On the recommendation, will go to Council September. And there are a task force. So the CEO of the library, the police, and the settlement agencies, Chinese community, school, George J. School, seniors, Songis, Squamish Nation, and other organizations sit. And we've been working hard to develop a Welcome City strategy. And this is like the first city to do such a strategy. And we are using the Welcome in America, which is the umbrella, and Australia and Germany and New Zealand use it. So I'm proud of that. And we have, for the first time, Equity and Inclusion Diversity Office, which would give the staff the right questions to ask: who does the city serve, and who do we leave behind, and how to embed equity in all our policies and procedures. That's a long process, but we are putting the first bricks, which I'm proud. As a council, as a city, we are taking that work. We are reviewing our engagement framework, how we engage with the public. So I'm excited about that. And we are working closely with the Fraser University. They have engagement framework tools. So those are quick things. And I'm learning a lot about procedural government and how to move policies, and it takes time. Yeah, so trying to do with the rest of the council and the city as much as I can. And the mayor, I'm grateful that she's on board and she's taken leadership. And even when the London incident, terror happened, she called the imam right away and said, I'm here and able to support whatever you need. And we've been working closely with the board of the masjid in terms of, and even Ramadan, it was nice to let the adhan be outside, and that was interesting. And just to conclude, one thing that today, as we celebrate ourselves as refugees, as we celebrate refugees, one thing we learned from COVID-19 and this whole pandemic is the fear of unknown, the uncertainty that the 18 months or the 1 year and a half, the larger public, the nation have faced. This is something is very familiar with refugees. It's not new, because refugees sometimes leave Rohingyas or anywhere they are, uncertainty in vain for decades, generation and generation, not knowing what comes second, not knowing if life would improve, not knowing what life holds, what their future holds, but they still have hope and they still have belief, and they know tomorrow gets better. And that is true, because I'm a witness of that, and I'm a testimony of that. Naeem is testimony of that. Salim is testimony of that. And this might be extraordinary stories, but I want to celebrate everyday ordinary refugees who are in Canada that might not have this platform, but add to this country and to their community and host community every single day in their own way through their families and everything they do. So I celebrate you, every refugee that might not have been with us today. But I know so many names that I could tell you right now that every day is contributing the economic, social fabric, culture, and the well-being for all Canadians. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Sharmarki, and that's a really great point that you just made. A lot of folks do come to Canada seeking safety, fleeing persecution, and not everyone has to have a amazing success story. Folks do come to Canada and they live their lives and they go about their business. They're nurses, accountants, you know, they work at the local grocery store, and that is contributing to our local communities and our society. So in no way do we want to say that every refugee that comes to Canada has to have a huge success story like the successes that we've featured today. But we do want to highlight that every single former refugee that lives in Canada does contribute in their own way, like Sharmarki said, to their families, to their communities, to their cities, by volunteering, by being great Canadians and positively contributing to their communities. And I also wanted to thank you for also highlighting how individuals become refugees and why they're forced to flee, and that it's not a choice, and it's not a choice often to come to Canada. So sharing your story really serves as an example of someone who had to flee and through trials and tribulations has found success. And we need more folks holding positions in municipal governments at the provincial and federal level from refugee backgrounds to be able to speak from the perspective of a former refugee and to bring their rich experiences and skills and knowledge to our government and to our local government and to, you know, all levels of government so that we can impact policy, program development, funding, all of those things. And I would like to thank all of our speakers for this panel, Salim, Hiba, Naima, and Sharmarki. You've highlighted the successes and contributions former refugees make to our communities while showing how you're using your empowered voice to be leaders in our communities and advocate for newcomer refugees who may not have a voice or who may not be in the position to use their voice as leaders. Thank you. I've learned a lot, and as a former refugee myself, I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to you know, mark and honor all refugees around the world who, you know, again, are forced to flee and did not choose to have to leave their home countries. And I'll pass it back to you, Yusuf. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bahar. You know, we really appreciate your incredible work in helping to organize this event tonight. And I really, you know, want to highlight the incredible work that ISS of BC Refugee Hub is doing locally in British Columbia to provide resources and support for newcomers and for refugees. Before we end our event tonight and let everyone go out and enjoy the first night of summer, I'd like to ask my friend and colleague Tarek Tayyab to share a few final words with us. Tarek is a co-founder of Islam Unraveled Anti-Racism Initiative, Foundation for a Path Forward, the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services, the Muslim Care Center, and the Vice President of the BC Muslim Association. He is also a co-host of the Refugee Portal podcast, and he really helped to bring the event tonight together. Tarek, if you'd like to share a few words.
And just a note of thanks and gratitude for everybody and yourself, especially Yusuf. Thank you for helping put all the pieces together as you always do. So thank you again to everybody. Thank you to every speaker, and grateful to work with you. And if you haven't been on our podcast, we'd love for you to be on the podcast and talk to you guys much longer in more detail. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Tarek. And as we end today's event, as Tarek said, we want to thank our speakers for sharing their time, their voice, and their lived experience with us. International days like World Refugee Day are really occasions for us to elaborate and educate the public on issues of concern and to mobilize political will and resources to address these global problems and to help celebrate and reinforce the achievements of humanity. Bringing these programs together really was a team effort. We'd like to thank our supporting organizations, including ISS of BC, ISS of BC Refugee Hub, St. Andrew Wesley's United Church, the Pacific Mountain Region, United Church of Canada, the Muslim Food Bank and Community Services, Aspire, JAS Toronto, Mosaic, Success. We'd also like to sincerely thank those institutions whose material contribution supports the events and programs that we are convening. The Ministry of Canadian Heritage, the Province of BC, Resiliency, BC Anti-Racism Network, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and IDRF for their incredible support in helping us, but also helping with these programs and initiatives themselves. Before we end today, there's one final thing. Tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we will be hosting another event discussing the topic of truth, justice, and reconciliation. And you are all invited and more than welcome to join that as well. So thank you again. Thank you, Mary Point from Musqueam Indian Band. Thank you, Chris Friesen, Chief Operating Officer of ISS of BC. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer Heineman, PhD, Assistant Vice President of Research at York University. Peggy Lau, Program Director at Success. Brother Azim Daya, Executive Director, Muslim Food Bank Community Services. Rand Walker, Lead Minister of St. Andrew Wesley's United Church. Mufti Asim Rashid, Al Ihsan Educational Foundation. Thank you, Elise Herzig, for Executive Director, JAS Toronto. Bahar, thank you so much. Bahar Tahiri is ISS of BC, BC Refugee Hub. Salim Spendari, Senior Manager in Refugees, Migrant Workers Programs at Mosaic. Hiba, always a pleasure to see and hear from you. Hiba Aldat, Youth Leader and former Syrian refugee. Naima Ali, Educator and former Somali refugee. And Shamarke Dubo, Victoria City Councillor, former Somali refugee. Thank you, everyone. Go out, enjoy your first night of summer, and God bless.
Thank you.